Hello everyone, I'm Admiral Ellis of the TTO, and we're going to start a story here. It's called The Men Who Bargained for the Universe, and it's about a trio of solar array workers who come to broker a deal with us being the TTO. It's not something that happens every day, and that's outlined, of course. It's a total of 43 pages, and it has a relatively short, little foreword. Dear reader, in a universe of infinite possibilities and boundless ideas, it is startling the amount of fiction that was simply ripped from the universe and changed the slightest bit for television, video games, or literature. And so much of what became pop culture of another time, coincidentally, ended up here, on Mabel's Cafe, in the custody of the TTO. And while I unfortunately never became any sort of phenomenon, I'm here too. That was Admiral Ellis, an officer of the Time Travelers Organization. "2:33 p.m. Mabel's time, Thursday, April 13th, year 947, aboard Devereaux, docked to Mabel's Cafe. I relaxed. There was little to be done, making my vacation from normal life well worth it. The rest of Devereaux's skeleton crew was sound asleep in their rooms aboard the hibernating city ship, making my office the only active room in the entire 3.3-kilometer wide vessel. The soft white light enhanced the silver hues of the neighboring control room and cast dim shadows on the open expanse where the Stargate sat. My brown hair and brown eyes, along with my thin, 5'7" self, was typing up an official report of what my duty was in the events of a month and a half ago, where an ascendant Goa'uld almost brought an untimely end to the Time Travelers Organization for the second time in a row. As I wrapped up my final paragraph with speculation on our elusive enemy's whereabouts, I heard urgent footsteps coming up the grand staircase of Devereaux's gate room. In the darkness, I saw a flutter of a certain signature leather jacket before the Ninth Doctor crossed the threshold onto the bridge to my office, and allowed the light to shine on his smiling face. The first words were mine. "Weren't you on a trip with Kirk and the gang?" I recalled, slightly confused with his random appearance. "It seems your memory's in rare form today, Admiral," came his reply, referencing the fact that I tend towards forgetfulness. "The Enterprise is still out. I got a message and came back as soon as I could." "What kind of message?" I asked curiously. It wasn't often that someone contacted us with anything. It was almost always the other way around. The TTO is almost exclusively in the backdrop of the universe, always there, but never really making any changes unless absolutely needed. He grinned down at me, towering over my silver desk. It was easy to tell he sensed my apprehension. I'd been in far too many a battle to count and was wary of another. "It's no war, Ellis. We're going to—" Before he could finish his thought, though, my desk started ringing. More precisely, the subspace telecommunication system aboard the city was receiving a call. I had rerouted the default controls into here for when the main control panels were shut down, as they were now. With a single button press, and to the surprise of the Ninth Doctor, a two-dimensional holographic screen appeared above my desk. The face which it displayed was none other than that of my friend Dr. Catherine Halsey. She's also the lead scientist of the TTO, giving her the authority to even order an admiral like myself around. "Good afternoon, Admiral," she began, speaking plainly and militaristically. She was hardly a cordial woman, even at the best of times, and right now she was all business. "Afternoon, Catherine," I replied, not only trying to lighten the mood by using her first name, but preventing the confusion by avoiding the use of the prefix Doctor when in the presence of the Ninth. She continued as if I had said nothing. "The Long Night of Solace is prepared to give your newfound city ship a tune-up. I'm giving you the coordinates now, and I expect to see you soon." I would later wonder if the microphone and camera even worked in my office that day, as I'd just built them in. Halsey might have believed she was talking to an answering machine. Answering machine or not, I'd received the message, and was happy to know that her and her team of scientists were thinking about Devereaux and I. The request for an inspection and tune-up had gone out nearly a month ago, and while the inspection had taken place shortly thereafter, I hadn't heard a word from the Long Night of Solace since then. I immediately began making preparations to leave Mabel's, beginning by getting up out of my desk and strolling purposefully past a bewildered Ninth Doctor, over the bridge to the control room. He followed moments later as I pulled the protective sheet off one of the large, piano-like consoles. The outlines of the bulky, nearly square glass keys glinted in the low light. Sensing my presence, the console jumped to life, a white light springing forth from the glass. I reached over to one button on the far left and depressed it. The square tipped, and with a satisfying, deep chunk, began the city's startup sequence. The many lights in the 3-story Stargate room came to life one by one, and the shadows slowly lifted. The whiteness climbed the stairs out of the lowest sections, pushed the darkness away from the stained glass behind the Stargate itself, and finally began reflecting off the hexagonal ceiling opening that allowed vertical transport to the Puddle-Jumper Bay. In the center of it all, the gilded Pegasus-style Stargate gleamed, smothered in light. As the unstoppable brilliance of 10-million-year-old Atlantean lighting climbed down the main spire of Devereaux from my beautiful control room, the other systems started to come to life as well. One of these was the main artificial intelligence complex, host to Sarah, my AI companion and good friend. She appeared at my side, a light blue luminescent hologram of a 15-year-old girl. She wore a t-shirt and shorts, and had short-cut, somewhat unruly hair. Her holographic form whirled around, checking for other people in the control room with us. When she spotted the Ninth Doctor, patiently waiting off to the side, she exuberantly said hello. "Hello, Sarah," he replied casually, rocking on his heels. "It's been a while, hasn't it?" "It has, actually. Quite a while." She paused. "Are you here with a purpose, or—" "Yes, in fact," his smile returned. "I've a mission for you." I was in the middle of telling Ellis when we were interrupted by our resident Catherine Halsey. He nodded to me, a silent instruction to continue. "We're to report to the Long Night of Solace for a tune-up," I stated. "The coordinates should be in your databanks." Her eyes lit up with the prospect of our ship getting some TLC by the TTO scientists. "When do we leave?" she said quickly, and then, before I could answer, she added, "I'll wake the crew." She dematerialized to begin her task. With her gone, I turned to the Ninth, who was straightening his jacket and returning to a standing position from leaning on the control room balcony's railing. He suddenly looked up and pointed, not at me, but at my black microfiber windbreaker, a jacket that I began wearing regularly when I decided I needed my own look. It was a modern take on his iconic leather jacket, the likes of which I couldn't see myself wearing. He was simply asking if it was as he assumed, and I nodded in confirmation. "So, you were saying?" I asked, eager to continue the mission briefing that we had begun several minutes ago. "Ah, yes, of course. Well, I was contacted by a trio of solar array workers from 2357 who want to broker a deal." "They want to make a deal with us?" "As odd as it sounds, yes. I wasn't quite clear on the details. The message was rather short and garbled, but I did manage to get a time, date, and location." "Well, not to sound lazy, but why do you need us in Devereaux, then? Why didn't you just take the TARDIS?" The Doctor rarely requisitions other ships, almost exclusively preferring his own. "Well, a few reasons, actually. For one, I really want to make an entrance with these guys. They deserve a show. And a city ship class coming out of the time vortex is, quite honestly, one heck of a show. Secondly, I feel like I don't spend nearly enough time outside of my own machine. The TARDIS is great, but flying in her is nothing like flying in this monster of a spaceship." "So you wanted Devereaux just to be different?" "Good reason enough, but I feel like there's something more than that. Something more practical, perhaps?" "That's because there is," he grinned. "They mentioned something about equipment, and equipment isn't much use to us if I can't fit it through the TARDIS's doors." "For everything that your TARDIS is, it's true that it could use a loading dock." I chuckled. "Totally got your back there. So what did I miss?" And so I began the story of the Second Unseen Time War, a dreadful conflict that didn't quite get a decent ending. It was fresh in my memory, after all, but it bewildered me that he'd somehow missed the entirety of the conflict. "2:58 p.m. Mabel's time. Thursday, April 13th, 947, Devereux, dock to Mabel's Cafe. Midshipman Darren Sharp was the first of the crew to make it to the control room. In her life before the TTO, she'd worked for the Royal Air Force during World War I in another universe. An overload of time energy had broken a bridge open to their realm and allowed her and 4 others to pass through. A couple of inches taller than me, with blonde hair, blue eyes, and the determination to move a mountain, she's definitely the most headstrong of my crew. She's selfless, brave, and very intelligent. On the other hand, being so strong-willed makes her quite a bit impulsive, and she has the tendency to jump to conclusions. She's 14, and a peppy tomboy of a British girl. She climbed the stairs with passion, her RAF uniform spotless, and stood erect behind her console before stating with a smile, "Middy Darren Sharp reporting for duty, Ellis." She then added, "Hello, Doctor." "Afternoon, Miss Sharp," he answered. "Barking spiders," she said, mood suddenly altered. "It's afternoon already? I just slept the day away, didn't I?" She seemed actually upset. She set her elbow down on the side of the console and rested her chin on her fist, as if regretting the loss of her day. I chuckled again and then replied, "It's all right, we're on vacation after all." She straightened up again as the glum look faded from her face. "I suppose you're right. What are we doing now, did you say? I feel like we're not really on vacation anymore." That's when the ninth piped up. "As of now, you still are. But after the refit is complete on the Long Night of Solace, I have a mission for you." Oh no, the Long Night of Solace. I got so lost in there last time I had to have a grunt show me out. I was about to reply with the advisory remark that I had given to her a month ago, when they were doing the inspection, a note not to leave the ship, or else you might get lost, when the second member of my crew staggered his way up to the control room. Alexander of Hohenberg was a year older than Darren at 14, though a couple of inches shorter. Had brown hair and eyes like myself, and the same ambitiousness and determination. He was one of the other 4 that came through with her, in fact, and was also involved in their World War I, albeit in the beginning on a different side. He was the son of Archduke Ferdinand and the Prince of Austria-Hungary. By an extremely coincidental set of events, he eventually met and fell in love with Darren Sharp. He gave a nod to me as he sluggishly made his way up the steps, but immediately snapped to attention as best he could when he saw the ninth standing behind me. I heard the doctor laugh at the poor Austrian's reaction. He returned to shuffling over to his console until a smile from Darren straightened him up for good. "I'll go get us some coffee, Alec," she said. "Doctor, you want some?" "At 3 o'clock in the afternoon? I'll pass." Darren began the walk around the gate room to the conference room on the opposite balcony, where the coffee maker was kept. Alec's face registered surprise when he realized what time it was. "Did you wake us up for a reason, Ellis?" he yawned. "Or were you convinced I was sleeping too late? Because, now that I think about it, you might have been right." No, we have a job to do. 2, actually, if you count the refit." "Refit? Do we have to do more crystal stuff? I remember when we spent a whole day doing that on that random planet. We met that crazy revolution girl and her friends with the colored eyes." "No, Halsey's scientists are doing the refitting. We just need to get Devereux there. And as soon as Nick gets up here," I shot a glance across at the conference room, "and Darren comes back with your coffee, we can be off." No sooner had I said it than my 12-year-old apprentice came clambering up the stairs into the control room, having observant hazel eyes and equally shiny light brown hair. Almost a full foot shorter than Darren, he made up for his stature with a strong mindset and incredible bravery. I had indoctrinated him on a recovery mission, where a fellow time-ship crash-landed on a human-controlled planet. He was the first responder and, when we went to pick up the derelict ship, insisted on coming with us. I had eventually decided that he'd be useful, and he became one of the first to come with me as one of my companions. Today he had a Cumbres and Toltec t-shirt, and blue jeans that were getting a bit tarnished from climbing around a ship's inner workings. He reached the control room with a smile on his face and gave a big hello to the ninth doctor, who hadn't ever met him before. He asked a couple questions about the mission and then proceeded to his station, stretching his arms in a show of waking up. I yelled across the room to Darren, "You done over there yet?" Immediately she came striding out of the open doors, head high, holding 2 mugs of steaming hot coffee in her left hand. "Got 'em! Now watch this!" Under my breath, I let out an uh-oh. She pulled some sort of silver canister from her belt, about the size of a soup can, and flung it at the wall behind her head. It hit and stuck, then lowered itself on a cable to her hand. She picked it up, aimed it at the wall above the control room, and fired some sort of magnetically driven steel cable, which latched onto the wall above us. I stood there awestruck as she pulled out another small silver device, shaped like a question mark, and jumped up onto the balcony rail to latch it onto the cable. That done, she pulled up her legs and sped across the gap, dropping out onto the control room right in front of me. She hadn't spilled a single drop of coffee. Please tell me you didn't just make 2 giant holes in the walls of this room," I began repeating. "I didn't," she said happily. "I've been practicing that for months. Alec, here's your coffee." "How then?" She pressed a button and the small canister came screaming across the line after her. She reached up and grabbed it, and the cable popped off the wall on both sides, sliding back into the device. Vacuum cups and magnets. She sounded very proud of herself, and pointed the end of the cabling at me. It was indeed an array of fan-driven suction cups, and a ring of high-powered electromagnets. It's rated for almost a ton if the magnets get something. Without them it's just 300 pounds. Still good, though. Here you go, Nick. She tossed the canister to him, and he caught it. Then she did the same with the question mark-shaped device. "That's his?" I asked. "Yeah," Nick piped up. "Tesla gave it to me last week. Called it the Speed Line. Said everyone's going to have one by next year." "It's bloody nuts, isn't it?" Darren said. At that moment, the 9th raised his head. He mustn't have been paying too much attention earlier, because he suddenly turned to Darren and pointed, "Hey, I didn't know you were British." "Damn right. Barking better Brit than you are," she said offhandedly. "You aren't even really British anyways." "I have no doubt that I've lived there more than you have." "That still doesn't make you British. You have to be born a Brit." "That doesn't matter. I bet you I know more of the underground than you do." "That's not fair. When I was alive, the underground hardly existed." Alec, invigorated by his coffee, pulled his head from his console to give one remark. "You know, considering you two are from different universes, there probably isn't going to be too much in common anyways." They stopped and stared at him, as if he was turning colors. "All right, bickering time's over," I said. "Stations, everybody, please." Everyone in the room moved to their respective consoles, starting the systems that they ran. Even the 9th got a control panel. With all that done, I began to proceed to one of the many teleporting elevators situated around the city. Yet as I was leaving the control room, I decided to instigate by casually noting, "Darren, you're Scottish." I felt the tension build and then immediately be shattered. Alec broke down into laughter. Darren scowled at me, then him, then broke down into a guilty smile while looking at the doctor. Chuckled once, and started laughing too. Nick was already giggling. He knew it was coming. Then the doctor started laughing as well. "You bluffed me the whole time," I heard him say as I exited, bound for the elevators once again. A touchscreen monitor built into the wall allowed me to select where I wanted to end up, and my options were anywhere from the floor above to far out on one of the city's piers. I opted to descend a few levels, entering the 3rd most important room in the city, the chair room. This was, despite the name, a more controlling room than the control room itself. The room alone was unimpressive, a single Alterran control chair in the middle of a large octagonal room, with no windows and only one other small control panel. What was special was what it could do. I stepped up into the chair and sat back in it. It reclined and began glowing an eerie blue. As if on command, Sarah materialized next to me and began pacing around the room. "Where were you?" I asked, confused. I began to disconnect from Mabel's cafe. "Just now or before?" The city rumbled as the magnetic couplers depolarized. we began to drift away from the spoke where we had been docked. Preferably both. Well, I ran some cycles with the data Halsey gave us first, and then I had the doctor give me his information and ran some cycles with that. I think I have a decent schedule worked out. On the ceiling above me, the massive holographic projector sputtered to life, showing something akin to an old railroad timetable, complete with the times to arrive and depart, both at the long night of Solace and an as of yet unnamed solar array. With my mind connected to the city, I willed the projection away, replacing it with a standard hologram of Devereaux, with the 7 time drives highlighted, their frequencies displayed on small golden-colored boxes next to their locations. The time drives are the keys to how the TTO runs its starships. Once a starship becomes equipped with one, it is rebranded a time ship. These devices themselves are 4-foot-long, football-shaped glass containers, ribbed with brass to hold them together. Inside, subatomic particles from the beginning of time cause the devices to glow a yellow hue. It is these particles that, when charged, can warp the fabric of space-time, allowing travel in the 4th traversable dimension. The particles are, as the Doctor says, the physical embodiment of time energy, meaning that they are literally made of time itself condensed into matter. Most time ships only need 1 drive. However, a city ship class is so massive and spread out, and underpowered in the star drive department, that it takes 7 to safely pilot one through the time vortex. Having more than 1 drive can cause serious problems if they aren't synchronized, but the readings I was looking at were more than within acceptable range. I began feeding the time drives power from the 3 0-point modules that power Devereaux, exciting the particles and causing golden yellow time energy to begin creeping over the city, its buildings, and the shield. From the external cameras I could see what I always enjoyed seeing, the white and silver city, bathed in light, being consumed by the blinding yellow cloud of time itself. When the light came flooding into my room from the time drive at the base of the tower, I knew it was nearly time to go. When the mass of time had enveloped the city entirely, I would kick on the star drive and power into the rift in space-time we'd generated. Seconds later, a small green indicator permeated my gold-smeared view. This meant that the amount of time energy had reached critical mass. With a single thought, the huge banks of Alterran engine systems on the underside of Devereaux kicked on all at once. Despite the inertial dampeners, I felt the G-forces shove me down, just a bit, as the ancient city lurched forwards, and the huge shift of time energy, attempting to stick with the drives it emanated from, ripping a hole in the artificial fabric of space-time around Mabel's. To the outside observer, the city and its yellow shroud vanished in a flash of light. To us, all of the time energy suddenly evaporated, blasted off as we fell into the time vortex. 2:15 p.m. Mabel's time, Thursday, April 13th, year 947, aboard Devereaux, in the time vortex. My external cameras showed a stable time vortex, a widening tunnel, cutting through clouds of time, each infinitesimal speck of moisture that made up the clouds representing an event. For the first time in a long time, the ride was smooth. The only turbulence came from the slight desynchronization of Devereaux's time drives. The translucent walls were a rolling calm. The 3.3-kilometer across city ship glided through, enveloped in its protective shield, one of the most powerful kinds in the universe. The star drives hummed in near-perfect harmony, working like a charm. I relaxed, slumping slightly in the chair. It would be a safe flight, after all. Indicators blinked on and off on the holographic ceiling. Knowing the trip could take a bit, our ship being as big as it was, I opened a channel to the control room, hoping to stave off boredom. As the connection was made, laughter came ringing through the chair room. "What's going on up there?" I asked, amused. Apparently they were having a good time without me. "They were just—" the doctor began, and then broke down into chuckling. "We were just reminding the doctor about how we pulled his TARDIS off that train in the Old West," Darren cut in, and then laughed some more. "And how they almost," he wheezed with laughter, "how they almost swatted me off the roof of the parlor car, with my own machine as a battering ram." Yeah, Alex said. He only barely caught the lip of the doors before the thing swung away. They had me dangling from my TARDIS in the middle of the desert. Wash was trying to set me down somewhere nice. The other's laughs covered his voice. Almost had an unpleasant ride through a cactus. Thank God Rose was there to pull me up out of the way. You should have seen her face, poor Rose. She spent the whole time just staring out of the doors at me. It was fantastic. I had missed this whole fiasco, which had occurred less than a week earlier. There was a party for TTO operatives on a chartered train, somewhere in the southwest U.S., in 1898. I wasn't able to attend, unfortunately, but apparently, from what I understood, the train was hijacked and sent at full speed towards a dead-end track. Almost everyone was able to make it back to the TARDIS except for the Ninth, who was hosting the event. He did, however, manage to end up on top of the train, for whatever reason. The Serenity, with Darren and Alec on board, had shown up, on command, to hoist the TARDIS off of the doomed train, but they were too quick, and almost picked it up and carried it away before the Doctor was able to get in. "Are you going to try doing that?" I asked, cutting through the laughter. "A big outing with everyone? 'Cause I heard you'll be going soon." "I've been thinking about it. Every time I try to organize something, it just goes to hell, honestly." "I'd work on that, actually. I know a great place to go, so long as we can get there." "Where would that be?" "This really nice solar system I stumbled on a while back. I'd actually come upon it twice, and it took me quite a while to realize it was the same place. I found it once during the invasion of Mabel's and was sent there again, on a continuum restoration mission a few months later. The only reason I figured out it was the same place was because of the Stargate address. It was a huge solar system, with the amount of livable planets going into the double-digit numbers. I'd helped restart a revolution that had been sidetracked with the abrupt appearance of a random enemy timeship. We'd yet to track it down, but we're setting up a base there in case the ship tried to return. Also, I did get a bit friendly with the locals, as did my crew." Darren perked up instantly, knowing what I was talking about. "I'd love to go back there," she shouted. "I haven't even seen Sally Miss since we left. We have to get them on here after they die. It'll be amazing." "I have to say," Alec noted, "that it would be really cool to have them on board. This place is unspeakably empty." "All right, then. I'll talk to them next time we land there." I paused. "Hopefully during the Ninth's party. What do you think?" "I think it's a fantastic idea, getting everyone on here for a gathering. Going on an adventure that won't endanger our lives." "In 3 days I'm gone, so I'll try to get everyone on here Thursday. You'd better be docked." Suddenly Sarah entered the fray. "He'll be there, I'll make sure of it. We need to make the TTO proud of Devereaux, however we do it." She sighed. "As if we didn't draw enough attention to ourselves at the end of the war." "Apparently we didn't. The city's still empty." "We've got enough crew for the job," I defended. "But it doesn't feel like it," she stressed. Then added, "No offense, guys." "None taken," they replied in unison. I conceded defeat. The city, however beautiful, was empty. It was designed for hundreds of thousands, made by one of the most advanced races to ever roam the universe. I sat back in my command chair, barely listening to the continued chatter from the control room. I just concentrated on the silver hologram of the city above me, piloting as best I could. Almost half an hour later, a small blue notification appeared in the top right corner of my view. I had been anticipating its appearance for the past few minutes, and it meant it was time to power off the time drives and drop out of the vortex. The yellow tint that had clung to every surface slowly melted away as the drives shut down. The time vortex shredded around us, and we dropped from the semi-bright, cloudy tunnel to the inky blackness of space. I dimmed the lights in the room so that I could see the holographic camera feed better. The deep opalescent sheen of the Covenant supercarrier's alien metal blended in with the utter darkness of empty space. Only a few yellow lights gave away the ship's presence and allowed me to eventually pick out the 27-kilometer-long purple shape that is the long night of Solace. Moments after I noticed it, Alec managed to pin a beacon on the massive ship's location. The room tilted slightly as I engaged the star drives and sent us on a course to dock. The area around the long night of Solace shimmered as their shield dropped away, and I watched very carefully as ours shifted subtly in hue.
Darren was working to recalibrate our shielding to keep the atmosphere around Devereaux but not damage the Long Night of Solace as we docked with it. The enormous smooth shape grew in my holographic view, making even the might of my city ship seem insignificant. An unnoticeable speck on the side of the purple wall became the center of my attention. It was a door to the outside, a docking port. On my view it was highlighted. Its magnetic couplers were busy realigning to match ours, one of many hundreds of different door types on ships across the TTO's fleet. The ports on the Long Night of Solace were redesigned from the ground up to fit every single ship we could possibly have, or at least as many were feasible. As the edges of our ships neared, I switched from the high-zoom cameras at the tops of the tallest spires to the 1-to-1 ratio cameras closest to our external door. The supercharged electromagnets finally kicked in, and our two enormous hulks of metal connected with a resounding, metallic clack. The Long Night of Solace reactivated its shield, and the static bubble, fading to transparency, connected with our yellow Atlantean shield at the edges, and wavered disagreeably. Like a glowing tumor, Devereaux hung on to the side of the long, dark object. Content that we were connected well enough, I stood from my chair. Its blue lights blinked out, and the room brightened. All of the holographic views disappeared, and Sarah came in their place. We walked out of the room to the transporter, zapped back up to the control room. Everyone had stepped back from their consoles except for Nick, who was trying to route a call to the double-sided view screen hanging against the wall. The connection was made, and Halsey reappeared once again. "Very timely, Admiral," she said with the faintest of smiles. She seemed happy, or at least more so. "I contacted you," she checked her watch, "barely 2 minutes ago." "Well, what can I say?" I replied. "I'm a timely person." Everyone else in the control room laughed. They knew full well that I was hardly on time for anything. The doctor especially, who had known me the longest. In fact, it was the Ninth himself, very shortly after he regenerated, who requisitioned me. Now, I hardly saw him any more. Halsey continued unabated. There were about 3 dozen technicians ready to board, and the procedure should start, or should take, about an hour or so. If you could open your door, they'll be happy to start work. "Glad you've been thinking of us, Catherine. I'll let him in." I spun around and slapped a glass key in the console behind me. The docking port slid open to allow the scientist in. As I turned back around to face her, I smiled. "Mind telling me what you've cooked up this time?" She was about to answer when something else grabbed her attention. She began to speak quickly to someone off to her left, and the lights behind her began to dim. "Admiral," she said softly and carefully, "a ship dropped out less than 3 AU from her current position. We're rigging for silent running as to not be spotted. I suggest you do the same." "I'm on it," Sarah announced, and then disappeared. "You should come over here if we are to talk," she recommended. "I assume that this ship has nothing to do with us, but you never know who could be listening in." After muttering something about that wretched Parangoski, she continued, "Meet me in the steam lab." The last of the lights behind her dimmed, and the connection cut out before I could protest. With a sudden, dull thud, the room went black. The light in the windows slowly dimmed as the rest of the city shut down. After that, the few remaining running lights on the Long Night of Solace blinked out, leaving us in as close to utter darkness as the luminescent Atlantean shield would allow. "I would hope you'd leave us a path or something," Darren said. On cue, a third of the stair lights came on, giving us just enough of a view to safely navigate the grand staircase and get to the nearest transporter. We all crammed in, zapping over to the docking port with the push of a button. The last of the technicians strolled by as we stepped out. They hefted toolboxes, carried radios, and wore personal shields in case of emergency. "They've really gotten more advanced around here," the Ninth noted. "Impressed?" I asked. "Decently." As we crossed the threshold into the purple corridors of the Long Night of Solace, we were met with a map built into the wall. I stopped and stared at it. On my left, Darren did the same, as did Nick on hers. Alec looked in on my right. Behind us, the doctor looked over my shoulder at the map as well. On a 27-kilometer-long supercarrier, it helps to know where you're going, and they all seem to understand this well. After some time of confusion, Darren leaned past me to look Alec in the face. I dare you, she began deviously, to have a Pangalactic Gargle Blaster. Alec looked at her as if she'd grown another head. What in the universe is that? It's a drink. Trust me, you'll love it. She grabbed him by the hand and began towing him towards the stern of the vessel. Nick trailed them, his voice fading off into the distance as he said, I've heard it's like having your brain smashed out by a slice of lemon. Wrapped around a large gold brick, the doctor finished as they rounded a corner. He turned to me. Want to get a drink? I straightened my jacket. I'd love to, but I've got to talk to Halsey. I asked her to tell me what she's doing on my ship, not just going to go have a drink now. Ah, well. Wouldn't want to have her angry with you, would you now? He turned to walk away, then spun on his heel and walked back to me, smiling. I'll go with you. I'd like to see exactly what's going on around here. As we turned to walk towards the steam lab, the main lights clicked off, plunging the corridor into darkness. Slowly, red emergency lights warmed. Well, I guess that's silent running, I said. 2:52 p.m. Mabel's time, Thursday, April 13th, year 947. Aboard the Long Night of Solace. Slowly we proceeded through the massive ship. Our shoes clacked on the glassy floors, waxed to an impeccable shine. As dozens of other TTO operatives passed us, we were both given salutes, bows, and various other shows of respect from cultures and species across the universe. We had docked in an odd location, at a port far towards the bow. To descend to the laboratories behind the main hangar, we had to cross the threshold. The threshold was one of two spots where the ship split in three from a slip-space bomb during the fall of Reach, and work was constantly being put into these weakened sections of the repaired vessel. When the Long Night of Solace was selected as our next recovery operation, we knew we'd be in for the long haul. One section, the stern, had fallen down through the atmosphere to the planet, and lay there for long after the Human Covenant War had ended. The bow was left in orbit, and dragged into a collection pile for scrap, high above the North Pole of the planet. Ascendant Justice was also in this pile for a time. The middle section, the majority of the ship, was forcefully pushed into slipspace. It miraculously remained intact for the duration of the impromptu journey, and appeared safely many light years from the nearest star, Sirius. The easy part was finding all of the pieces. Where they went, save for the middle section, was effectively documented. We towed the bow and the center together and began patching them, after supplying a surrogate power source through a different junk ship, which was also left in the pile at Reach's North Pole. It wasn't nearly enough to power everything, but it let us have lights and oxygen, while we worked on the present 2/3 of the massive ship. It was almost a year before we extracted the stern of the Long Night of Solace from the surface of Reach. After reassembling the deorbited chunk of metal, we towed it to where the rest of the ship was and began patching it up. The reactors were completely rebuilt, and 6 months later, the ship could run under its own power. Yet over a century and a half after that, repairs are still being done. She has 17 time drives, more than any other TTO ship, and cannot fit in Mabel's. Because of this, the Long Night of Solace usually stays in orbit, around the restaurant at the end of the universe, our backup site in case of emergency, but occasionally traveled, as it was doing now. Ahead of us, there were few lights. Empty scaffolding lined both sides of the hall. The glassy floor took on a scorched demeanor as we neared the threshold. A few welders and technicians worked on a power coupling on one side of the corridor, their torches creating flashing lights that reflected off of the arched purple walls. Hastily fastened titanium floor panels marked the exact line where the ship split. They clanked as we walked on them, their welds having weakened after 170 years of time-traveling stress. Sparks fell from a gap in the ceiling, and I looked up to see another team of welders in the corridor above, fixing the floor. There was a thick gash in the ceiling, bridged by the same gray metal we were standing on. We passed the threshold into the center of the ship, and the world seemed to brighten. This section was the least damaged of the three, and the floor and walls were near perfect in their shine. Even the red emergency lights glare. That was spooky, I heard the doctor murmur. I nodded in agreement. We made a beeline for an elevator and took it to its lowest level. In transit, the silent running protocols came to an end. It dropped us out on the catwalks above the main hangar, a massive rectangular bay where we sent whole ships, 2 at a time, to be refurbished. As the lift unloaded, we stepped out onto the dizzying heights. The floor of the walkways were steel plating with holes drilled in a pattern, so I could see clearly down through the many layers of workers, clamoring over the unending sorrow and the Ishkil. Most wore jet packs or anti-grav packs, to allow them three-dimensional mobility. At the bow towards the end of the hangar was an enormous shield door, holding in the atmosphere of the bay, while allowing support ships to enter and leave, most at the moment bound for Devereaux. This space was the long night of Solace's center of attention. The bustle consumed us, and we began moving towards the stern wall. 2 mechanics and their Horogok helper bumped past as we entered a stairwell, still hanging high above the bay. A Kino hovered by, a mobile flying camera ball, the precursor to the sentient monitors that the Forerunners ended up building. 2 more chased after it in rapid succession. I glanced down again, and something between the 2 ships caught my eye. "I think Halsey's down there," I said. "What?" the doctor asked. "How could you possibly see her from all the way up here?" I was certain. No, I'm telling you, she's right below us, between the ships." "So what, then? Are we going to keep walking, or break out the rope and rappel down?" "I have something better in mind." Ahead, on the left, was a refueling platform. I picked up my pace and the doctor followed, our jackets flapping. The catwalks creaked as we ran the few dozen feet to our destination. I grabbed a support and swung around the corner, jumping the 2-foot gap to the platform, steel clattering. Right behind me the 9th did the same, and I immediately realized my plan. There was a rack of bullfrogs, the engineers' jet packs, on the wall, and I was reaching for one. The bullfrogs had a harness that you strapped into, distributing the weight of the 50-pound all-aluminum jetpack across the wearer's entire body. I leaned against the wall and pulled the straps over my shoulders and under my legs. Pulling them taut, I stood up, taking notice of my new center of gravity. It had been a while since I last used one of these. The doctor was already leaning out of the rear entrance to the room, when someone came pounding down the catwalk towards us. A junior engineer of no more than 20 years old rounded the corner, and, upon seeing us strapped into the bullfrogs, said, "What are you doing? You're not allowed to have those. You're not engineers." He was right. We weren't wearing engineer patches. But while the doctor sported no patch, I had an admiral rank designation just below where the left strap crossed my shoulder. Realizing who we were, he stopped, confused. "Doctor? Admiral?" he stammered. "Congratulations," the doctor said. "You busted us." He mockingly held up his hands, teetering on the edge of the platform. "You can arrest us at the bottom." He tipped backwards off the platform. Through the floor I watched him ignite his pack and make a 3-point landing on the catwalk below. I turned to the ensign with a wry smile on my face. "It's been a pleasure knowing you, J.E. I lit my jet pack. I'll see you at the bottom." I leapt off, through the gap in front of him, the floor passing inches from my face. The wind whipped as I plummeted past 3 layers of permanent catwalks, and then flew through banks of mobile, unstationary scaffolds, which moved on rails that hung as far down as 100 feet off the floor. I jerked to the right to dodge a girder and let the pack go full blast, in order to make a soft landing on the blackened hull of the Ishkil. With a thud, the doctor landed beside me. "Race to the bottom?" I asked. "Could be dangerous," he threw back. I was feeling audacious, so I mocked a trip over my own heel, and fell over the edge, saying, "Worth it!" Coming down with the pack half on was a lot more like free-running than it was skydiving. I dodged pieces of scaffolding, rails, girders, and cargo being hoisted about. I jumped off of things and landed and ran on others. All the time I could hear the doctor right behind me, and the speck that I had thought was Halsey grow in my view. When I was just a few 100 feet up, running along a rail for the unstationary scaffold, I got hit by an updraft. It smelled like the inside of a roundhouse. Grease and steam and smoke all mixed together. That was when I knew I'd been right. But it wasn't just Halsey. It was her favorite new toy. The War Machine. I hopped off the rail and dropped the last 100 yards to land right in front of her. The Kino that she had been tracking me with came to a rest in her palm. The 9-foot-tall steampunk monster leaned slightly as he finished watching my descent. He watched me through dull, tinted green eyes. Cogs and pistons whirred and hummed. The War Machine was something that Halsey and her group of scientists, including myself, came up with. An iron, steam-powered beast that was more than a match for any life form out there. She held out her hand, and he did the same. She placed a Kino and its controller in his oversized palm and said, "Put this away, please." "Command accepted," it boomed. The machine raised its head and turned slowly towards the wall behind her. The War Machine began a series of heavy footsteps towards the recharging station, the noise slowly dissipating as it got farther away. She turned her eyes skyward again. The doctor glided down and made an impeccable landing to my right, prompting her to give him a faint smile. "Make an entrance or don't enter at all, I suppose," she sighed. "Good to see you, Doctor." "And you, Catherine?" "Admiral, there's much for you to see. I feel that you'll enjoy your ship more now than you ever did." "Well, I was hoping you'd make it better and not worse. So that's exactly the result I would want." "Of course," she said plainly. Her emotionlessness was in rare form today, it seemed. "Please, dispose of your bullfrogs and come with me."
3:07 p.m. Mabel's time, Thursday, April 13th, year 947, aboard the Long Night of Solace. After dumping our jetpacks in a crate bound for the catwalks where we got them, we followed the thumping footsteps of the War Machine, and the damaged floors it left, until we came to the steam lab. When the doors parted, a layer of steamy mist coated the floor on the lower section. We waded through it and climbed the 2 stairs to the upper section, where Halsey was waiting. The War Machine had already stepped back onto its pedestal and powered down, giving her time to pull up the specifics on what she was doing to my ship. We leaned against built-in tool benches as the report came on screen. A list of specific upgrades and maintenance procedures began scrolling. Halsey began reading off specific ones. Star drive efficiency upgrades, time drive refuel, crystal restock, power conduit maintenance, Stargate close-op macro upgrade, tower connector maintenance, hull repairs, AI matrix upgrade. The list was longer than I'd expected. "Will you look at all that stuff?" I said. "We have done quite a bit of research as to what we can do to City Ship-class starships. There's a lot going into your upgrade." "Thanks a bunch, Catherine." I patted her on the shoulder. She replied with a stern look. Then, without warning, her gaze shifted suddenly past me. A thought hit me. Where was the doctor? Then I heard Catherine moan, "Oh no," followed by, "War Machine, put him down." I whirled around to see the War Machine holding the 9th by the neck, about 2 feet off the floor. It slowly lowered him to the deck on Halsey's command, and released its clamp on his throat. He let in a huge gasp, kneeling on the ground. "Got one hell of a grip, he does," were the first words out of his mouth. "Yes," Halsey replied, "he does. We engineered him to combat any life form he comes across, if need be." "And he decided to target you," I finished. Halsey turned to me, arms crossed. There had to be a reason why. "Doctor?" He looked at us sheepishly. I was just kind of fiddling with his gears. She sighed and ran her palm down her face. "Don't. Just don't." "I won't. Not anymore," he smiled, pulling himself off of the floor. He brushed himself off while I snagged a copy of Devereaux's changelog. "So," he began again, trying to segue, "want to go get a drink now?" "I think we're all set here," I said. "Halsey, want to come with?" She gave a light smirk. "I think I'll pass, Ellis. I'll let you know when the job is done." Moments later, I was at a table with Darren, Nick, and a very woozy Alec, clinking my Shirley Temple with the doctor's glass. 4:49 p.m. Mabel's time, Thursday, April 13th, year 947, aboard the Long Night of Solace. After an hour and a half of stories, drinks, and an early dinner, I received a message from Halsey stating, in short, that the upgrades to Devereaux were complete. The doctor was leaning back in his chair, Nick was slouched, and Darren was leaning on her elbow, and Alec looked like he was about to fall asleep. We were all exhausted from the food, and I almost didn't want to leave. Either way, we had a job to do. Well, I said, clearing my throat. I think we're all done here. I rose from the table. Everyone perked up, and the doctor gathered his coat. They're finished already? Darren asked. Everything important is completed. They're just getting to turning everything back on. Oh, cool. Let's go. Yeah, Alex stood up. And don't we have something to do? The doctor smiled. Ah, someone remembers. I remembered too, I said as I turned towards the exit. We need to talk to some random people about stuff that you can't fit in the TARDIS's door. Don't make fun of my TARDIS, he shot back. Everyone else caught up to me as I turned into the hallway. I'll make fun of whatever I want. Freedom of speech, Doc. I only called him Doc when I wanted to aggravate him. This began a good-natured verbal battle that lasted all the way into Devereaux, and only ended when I had to abandon the fight, so that I could use my mental power to safely enter the time vortex. Once we were steadily moving through time, I turned on the comm and said, New Devereaux definitely beats TARDIS now. Oh, no, he began, but Darren interjected. Honestly, the ride is 100 times smoother, she noted. My board's keys aren't chipped, and the life signs detector works perfectly, Nick added. And I think I can hear you guys at least 10 times better, I finished. Also, we hopped into the vortex a hell of a lot quicker. Alex started us off again, and then continued on his own. The sensors can now see any affected events that we pass. The shields are a lot more apt to modulate, and we got a weapon frequency matcher from the Destiny schematics, Darren threw in. The star drives got tuned up, the time drives are refilled, and I think they fixed all the lights in here, Sarah added, appearing out of nowhere in my chair room. They did a lot. That's only the tip of the iceberg, so to speak. All right, I get it, the doctor relented. Conceding defeat already? I asked. I don't think it's a battle I can win. If I had some sort of streamers or poppers or fireworks I could use when I won an argument with you, I'd use them now. Actually, we should get some fireworks, Alec noted out of the blue. Why do we need fireworks? The conversation was immediately sidetracked. He stopped for a moment. Because of... He was struggling. Because of the repairs, obviously. Celebration. From the background, Darren sarcastically asked, You just want to blow something up, don't you? I see no problem with that, Nick replied. I don't either, I interjected. Sarah, put firework acquisition on my to-do list. Done, she noted. All right, I sighed. More to do when we get home. Plotting a course to B8 1108, ETA 20 minutes. The city's time vortex shifted, the clouds rearranging in order to guide us to our new destination. A blue giant star system, 3 rocky worlds, and 5 gas giants. 2 major asteroid belts and a single colony of humans. Out just inside the first asteroid belt was an enormous solar station, 25 square kilometers of photovoltaic cells, spread out over a dozen miles. A system designed to absorb and transmit power back to the colony. I had to be precise. The doctor wanted me to give these guys a show, so I felt obligated to drop out as close to the array as was safely possible. 17 minutes later, the familiar blue indicator appeared again. Instead of doing what was right and slowing power gradually, I waited until the last second to pull all of the power from the drives. Everyone prepare to drop out and hold on to something. Oh! I heard someone in the control room say, and then everything went impossibly white. My ears rang. The crack of static electricity between the shield and the star's solar wind filled the air. That's new, I noted. The crackling faded as the shield modulated. We had just spontaneously dropped out of the time vortex barely 20 miles from the solar array. It was shaped like an enormous snowflake, and the blue panels sparkled, adding to the icy illusion. Then something else blue caught my eye. It was Sarah, leaning in the doorway. Hey, they wired me in a lot better, she said. You don't have to sit in that chair all day anymore. At least not right now. We're on a docking course. All right, then. I'm heading up to the control room. I stood, then thought for a moment and added, exactly how well are you tied in now? Enough to make any intruder worried. Or me, I added. I stepped off of the chair's platform, headed for the door. Sarah followed, shimmering as she crossed the threshold. You know, she said gleefully, a virus's purpose is to collect information. I began to object, but she continued. An artificial intelligence lives off information. It's like oxygen. So using me as a virus was a perfect idea, because if I don't do my job, I suffocate, so to speak. How does this relate to you being the NSA around here with the cameras? I'm saying I'm doing my job, what I was programmed for. That's wonderful. Don't stalk me. Don't worry. I won't. I stepped into the elevator, and before I could press a single button, I was zapped to my destination. The doors slid open, and Sarah was waiting for me. I can't say I didn't enjoy not having to do anything. I knew you would. I continued straight down the hallway into the lower area of the Stargate room, turned to my right, and climbed the grand staircase to the control room. The view screen had already been activated, and the doctor was standing with his hands behind his back, leaning on a console, talking to a gruff older man over the comm. As I stepped onto the overhang that signified the edge of the control room, I heard Darren say, "And here he is now." On the screen I saw an ageless man, with creases stretching down his face. His old blue eyes held the same smile that the rest of his expression gave, and his hair, just beginning to turn gray, was cut rather short. He cocked his head and looked around. I approached and stood in front of the monitor. "You the captain of that there vessel?" he said with a Texan drawl. "Yes, I am," I responded proudly. "Pilot, too." "Aw, damn, man, that was one hell of an entrance." "I try," I shrugged. "I'm Admiral Temelio, by the way, but call me Ellis." "All right. My name's Jacob Wretch, if you were wondering. These here colleagues of mine are Gregory Thowms and Skyfall. Well, we call him that. His name's Drevin Arrow." I looked into the background of the bright camera feed and saw two other men standing with him. On his left, my right, there was a red-haired, round-faced man with rather pale skin. Opposite him there was another man, dark hair and dark eyes, average build. After a few moments, though, I noticed something that wasn't quite right. "Why do you call him that?" He pointed to the man on his left. "'Cause apparently he fell from the sky. Parents found him in some sort of pod in a cornfield." "That's different, definitely." I had noticed Drevin had pointed ears. It was over 300 years before first contact with the Vulcans would happen, yet this was either a Vulcan or a Romulan who apparently fell from the stars as a child. More research would have to be done. "I'm on a docking track," I said, changing the subject. "What door should we use?" He turned to his colleagues and announced, "Line 'em up a port!" They scurried off, and moments later we were receiving a transmission. "Use these cords to line yourself up. We'll be waiting at the door." "All right, Sarah, guide us in." "Working on it." The city shifted and slid silently towards the center of the solar array. One of our external doors prepared its interlocking clamps and connection shield. A small screen on a nearby console showed our distance and time from our destination, as well as our relative speed. A short while later we ground to a halt, fully interfaced with the enormous but delicate station. I left the control room with the doctor in tow, and we met Jacob, Gregory, and Drevin at the doors. "Pleasure to meet you all," the doctor said, and shook each of their hands. I stepped forward to do the same, and noticed a stark difference in height. While Gregory was about my size, Drevin was a few inches taller than me, and Jacob towered at least half a foot over my lowly stature. Nonetheless, I shook each of their hands. "You the Admiral?" Jacob asked. "That I am." "Thought you'd be taller," he muttered. Following this up with a smile, he added, "Come with me." We advanced through the hatch into a panorama of perfect white. The lighting was impeccably bright and joyous. No doubt a consequence of the fact that there was no shortage of power here. We passed potted plants, openings to other endless passageways and battery rooms, and finally came to a door marked Auxiliary Storeroom, number 3. "Here's what we told you about," said Gregory, his voice tinted by an unmistakable Irish accent. "From what I've heard, you didn't tell us much," I noted. "We had to make sure you'd come no matter what," Drevin threw in. Vulcan logic, I thought to myself. "Well, I can't wait to see what it is." The door slid open and the lights clicked on. The room, a stark contrast from the pure white corridors, was gray. The girders that were originally used in its construction were uncovered and visible on the walls. A white vapor clung to the floor, and 6 large stasis chambers stood, 3 on each side of the room. "What in blazes?" I let out. "Who are these people? Why are they here?" "Take a look for yourselves," Jacob began, but the doctor was already scouring over the first, looking for a nameplate. When he found it, he announced, "General Jonathan Arturo II? My God, this is awesome! We need a good 23rd century figure. Also, he was one of the greatest strategists of his time. Honestly squandered, born in a time of peace." He moved on to the next one, and, having knowledge of where it would be, found the nameplate instantly, and said Dr. Kelly Gorgon, Ph.D. in astrophysics, bachelor's degree in quantum physics, an excellent scientist. So, I turned back to Drevin, having been distracted by the doctor's outbursts. "Why are these great men and women preserved in your cryopods?" "It is our duty, and the duty of this installation, to preserve the deceased minds that could alter the future, in the case that there is one day technology to revive them." It hadn't struck me that they were dead until he mentioned it. "Hey, Doc!" I shouted down the room. "They're dead!" "Not a problem," came the reply. "If you're supposed to be preserving them, what right do you have to pawn these chambers off on us?" "Well," Jacob began, stepping back into the room, "that's where it gets complicated. We recently elected a new head of the UNSC. With that, they gained knowledge of these 6 corpuscles in here. They don't like 'em. Want us to eject 'em into the sun. But I did some figuring, and supposed that we could do a bit better than that. And so could these guys and gals." The doctor, having completed his circuit of the room, came back to the doorway and seamlessly entered the conversation. "That's what we need to talk about, though," he said. "What it is you want for these frozen geniuses." "From what I know of your organization, the TTO, you don't screw with how the universe works. You try and keep it how it is. We all have different motives for what we're gonna ask for, but I'm almost certain that it boils down to stuff that's very similar. I, for one, am colorblind. Nothing I can do about that. When I was younger, dreamt of being a pilot till they found out. I just want to make a difference out there. I can settle for not flying, I just want to help people." He nodded to Gregory to take his turn. I never really found my calling. I always wanted to learn about people, though. Cultures, races. How the world went on before starships and cell phones. To learn and teach." His voice trailed off, not sure how to continue. "Due to my unique background, I was unable to apply to the universities I wished to be enrolled in," Drevin said. "No law schools would take me, forcing me to pass up the opportunity to be a politician of any kind." I made a mental note. Vulcan politician? The first honest lawmaker in the history of the world. Rethinking it, he continued, "I believe I would enjoy the position of ambassador." There was a moment of silence. "You're all in luck," the doctor said. They stared at him. He continued, excited. "You can all be exactly what you want, working with us." "You need sociologists?" Gregory asked. "Or ambassadors?" Drevin added. "Despite what you may have heard," I told them, "we aren't only a run-and-gun, shoot-'em-up organization. While that happens a lot, we're still all-encompassing. There's diplomacy to be had, knowledge centers to be filled, and children to be taught. While we can't take you now, expect to see us later in your lives. Is that a good deal?" "You want us to work with you?" Drevin seemed confused. "Of course. We need everyone we can get. The The universe is a big place with a lot of stuff going wrong all the time. It takes a lot to solve every problem we come across. This is better than I could have hoped for. Jacob smiled. Working with the TTO? Amazing! Gregory shouted. Isn't it fantastic? The ninth replied. When do we begin? You start when you die, I said plainly. All excitement came to an abrupt end, and put me on the receiving end of several blank stares. Yeah, you'll have to wait before you begin work, the doctor began. In order to not disrupt the timeline, we take people at the very end of their life cycles. Well, what good are we to you if we're 90 years old and about to die? Or dead? Jacob mused. I laughed. You won't stay that way if we take you. We can de-age people, repair their telomeres, make them look, feel, and be younger. I'm almost a decade over 2 centuries, and how old do I look? 14. Well, you're close. I'm 16. Well, damn, you still had me fooled. What about the cryo chambers? Have anything to move them with? Old suit of prototype power armor. Can lift a good couple of tons. Is that how you got him in here? Yeah, but the guy who piloted him moved on. Doesn't work here anymore. Although, he was about your size. Gregory's about my size, I defended. Gregory gained a worried look as Jacob's gaze turned between him and I several times. Finally, Jacob turned to me, smiled, and said, You're the one who wants to... Fine, I'll do it. Where's the suit? Another storeroom. Come with me. 11:23 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Monday, October 21st, 2357. Arturo Memorial Solar Array. It was actually pretty impressive, that old armor. It was less a suit as it was some sort of exoskeleton. Solid straps clasped around my joints and electric-powered pistons connected them. A huge transformer on my back tied everything together and connected the array of mechanisms I was wearing to a 2-inch thick cable that tied directly into the stainless steel sockets on the wall, spaced every couple dozen yards. The entire system was painted a matte black and buzzed with hot electricity. I picked up my left foot, and the machinery responded in kind. I could feel it take the weight off my leg and shift the center of gravity over my right leg, forcing the mechanical boot I was standing in into the floor. The white paneling cracked. Don't worry, Jacob said, noting the surprise on my face. We have extras. I shifted my weight and took a step forwards, ducking out of the storeroom and into the hallway. I was careful not to break the panels on the floor as I took my next few dozen steps, until I reached the point where the cable was taut. I stood straight up and tried to balance the suit as best I could. Gregory unhooked the cable from the wall behind me, picked up the end, and sprinted the 24 yards until the cable was taut again. There he put the end of the cable into another wall plug-in, and I continued walking. We repeated this cycle as I broke more of the floor, and made my way back to auxiliary storeroom number 3. Once there, I walked into the gray, cold room and clomped over to the first stasis chamber. Drevin had already gone ahead and detached it from the wall, and with a flick of a switch, it turned 180 degrees, exposing 2 thick handles on the rear. Take hold of these and carry this to your ship. Got it, I said, and clasped the 2 metal extensions. The suit gave me 100 times my strength, and I picked the 3,500-pound stasis chamber off the gray metal floor, turned, and navigated carefully towards the door. The transformer whined, pushing near maximum current. I was worried it would overheat, but it didn't. Many careful steps and several broken panels later, I made it to Devereaux's door. Sarah had already taken the proper precautions and supplied more than enough power to the outer edge of the pier. Darren and Alec ran cables from the grounding station to the very edge of the city, ready to couple the metal and glass enclosure to our power systems. I let the container down as softly as I could and turned to go pick up the next one. Gregor was scrambling for mats for me to step on, as they were not sure how many extra panels they had, and did not expect them to be so fragile. I made the trip back to the storeroom, grabbed the next pod, and carried it to Devereaux. I then repeated that 4 more times, until we had all 6 lined up in the hallway, just on the other side of the docking port. I carefully wiped the sweat from my brow as we congratulated ourselves on our accomplishment. I ducked through the docking port once more so that I could pilot the suit back to where it started. As I disembarked from the black, powerful framework, a sense of relief washed over me. We had all the stasis pods, safe and sound. These 3 good men were guaranteed a job with us, and there were no complications. I trotted back to the docking port in a good mood. When I arrived, however, that happiness faded. Jacob was waiting for me. "There's UNSC coming over here, Admiral. You might want to scram before they see you. That is, if they haven't already." "Is it a routine patrol, or what?" I asked. "I can't say I know. My best guess is they're coming to make sure we done our job within their corpuscles, spat 'em out into the sun." "Not what I would have hoped," I sighed. I backed across the threshold into Devereaux, saying, "Wish us luck, then. We'll be seeing you." The door slid shut, and I bolted for the control room. "On dock! On dock!" I shouted as I ran up the stairs. "Aye, on it," was Darren's reply. "We need to get the hell out of Dodge before the UNSC gets here. Spin up the drives, Alec. Get us an exit vector on the double." "Yes, sir. Plotting course." "I'll be in the chair room piloting us out of this mess." But before I could turn to run, Nick's little voice stopped me. "Ellis, we're being hailed." I muttered something profane under my breath and turned to face him. Put it on screen. The double-sided view screen popped to life and a man, probably no older than 25, came on screen. He was no doubt a greenhorn, maybe not even a captain yet. His voice was as weak as his appearance, not childish, but inexperienced and not at all forceful. "Unidentified starship, please, identify yourself, or I've been authorized to use force." "Look, man, I don't want to start a battle here. In fact, I'm leaving." I was trying to stay calm and collected. "Identify yourself!" His voice was shaky. "I have 200 Archer-guided missiles at my disposal. You will identify yourself!" I turned off my microphone and turned to the doctor. "If they fire, wait until we're hit, and then fire back. 2 drones. Just shake them up. No major damage, no casualties." I turned my mic back on and turned it back to the camera. "I'm telling you, I don't want trouble. You can inspect whatever you want after we've left. Your solar array is fine." At that moment I noticed that was probably not the best thing to say. "That array is UNSC property. Vessels require a pass to dock with it. You have left me no other choice but to fire." The connection was cut. I wondered if, though he had seemed to become more sure of himself the more he talked, he truly thought that he could damage Devereaux. No matter what he thought, Alec quickly reported that 20 Archer missiles were streaking towards us. I made the decision to abandon the conversation and run to the chair room, virtually eliminating any further chance of negotiation. "Arm the drones!" I shouted as I ran down the stairs. I heard the doctor object as the doors to the transporter sealed, and I zapped down several stories. Due to Sarah's upgrades, the chair was already active, and I did little more than sit down. But instead of the city's hologram appearing over my head, there was a targeting display. The tiny Fezzik-class frigate in my sights was old even to that era. Designed in 2303, it was now relegated to security duty in a system well within the UNSC's confines. Despite its age, however, the hull showed few signs of wear. This was one of the few things that made what I was about to do easy. I targeted the thickest armored portions and waited. One unlucky missile impacted what can only be described as a pebble and exploded halfway to us. The remaining 19 solid-fueled missiles flew true and slammed into our Atlantean shield. The damage they did was negligible. The 2 yellow points of light then flew from their port on the north pier, exited the shield, and streaked past the solar array that we had just left. They broke formation and flanked the enemy ship. They pounded the titanium armor, leaving 2 near-identical craters on opposite sides of the ship. What followed was an eerie silence. "Sarah, send them data burst about us. Nothing big, just who we are, and why they shouldn't have wasted those Archer missiles on us. All right, done. Now let's get out of here. The time drives filled the air with yellow energy, and we left without further incident. As morbid as it sounds, there was little to do now but wait for the array workers to die. 11:22 p.m. Mabel's time, Thursday, April 15th, year 947, Mabel's Cafe. Time is a strange thing. While it had been 2 days for us, Drevin had survived almost 150 years. Even stranger was the fact that of all 3 of the array workers we were waiting for, he was the last chronologically to die. In his time, he'd worked until the old array was uselessly outdated. At that point, he was given a promotion and was changed to a sector of the UNSC dealing with the infrastructure on newly colonized planets, but was killed 15 years later in an accident involving a malfunctioning orbital elevator. As the magnetically accelerated cart plummeted downwards out of control, I was pounding up the stairs towards Mabel's cafe's control room, convinced that our elevators would not get me there in time. I stumbled into the main chamber, a large oblong room where we kept our ace in the hole when it comes to time travel, what's called the Variable Time Portal, or VTP for short. Using the console in front of it, one can calibrate it to any event in time and space, limited to our universe only. This being said, it has downsides, such as the fact that, without anyone to guide you back through, it's essentially one way. The portal is invisible from the other side, and unless something, a hand for instance, or a rope, is poking through, it's almost indefinitely small. This is to save power, as it is an expensive device to run. It is directly and permanently linked to one other identical device, but it is believed that there were more during the time of the 4 races. As the design was a collaborative effort between the Alterans, the Asgard, the Furlings, and the Nox. It was the Doctor, however, that advised them on its creation, and convinced them to add a time travel aspect, even if it was only to a single gate. The gate itself is not square, rectangular, or even circular as other Alteran gates are. It's closer to a triangle, a craggy shape unique to each gate. The shapes are the only way to tell them apart, as most of them were functionally identical. The only other difference is that each gate's console has mounted on it a plaque stating the Stargate address at which the gate can be found. When I stepped up to ours in order to tune it to save Drevin, I noted that it had none. Mabel's Cafe, being out of the normal universe, is not within the range of any Stargate. I gave the console a set of coordinates, and it found the planet we were looking for. This was the fledgling world where Drevin had been working, planning out the infrastructure for a civilization to be built. Being more precise, I navigated the portal opening to the base of the orbital elevator's tethers, and began shifting it upward against the pull of gravity, hoping to catch Drevin's doomed cart along the way. I didn't. My view soared all the way to the space station which the orbital elevators were attached to. When I got there, all I found was an empty cart. Suddenly struck by the notion that perhaps I was too late, I started to get worried. While I had neither seen nor altered the event I was looking for, I had still put a hole in time and space close to it. My training told me that if I had tried to correct my mistake and looked at the area earlier, I could upset the universe's delicate balance and begin breaking down the timeline. To my immediate relief and surprise, however, the cart's doors slid open, and the familiar but aged form of Drevin Arrow Skyfall stepped in. With an alarm bell and a lurch, the cart began its fateful descent. Without warning, my apprentice appeared at my side and suddenly made a dash for the VTP. "I'll go get him!" Nick shouted. Also appearing out of nowhere, the Ninth Doctor grabbed him by the arm and stopped him. "I'm on my way out," he said. "Seriously this time. You won't be seeing me again." He released a half-hearted sigh combined with a laugh. "But I thought I'd drop by one more time and save the universe by allowing our friend here," he gestured to Drevin, to release the final version of a cross-feed fusion reactor to the UNSC shipbuilding facilities on the planet Reach. If you had run in there, Nick, he may not have sent that email. That reactor went into the Pillar of Autumn, allowing her to keep the Covenant busy for long enough for Noble Team to deliver a fragment of Cortana to those same shipbuilding facilities and upload it to the Autumn. My catching you is now the only reason that humanity discovered the Alpha Halo and survived the Human Covenant War. Do you see how patience can be helpful? Nick solemnly nodded. I looked very carefully through the VTP and noticed Drevin tap his tablet once, and then put it away. Now, the Ninth said, we go get him. Nick and I walked through the portal, leaving the doctor behind. After us came the end of a rope, which we would use to get back in. Drevin was naturally surprised at our appearance, but recognized me instantly, and understood at once while I was there. It has been a long time, Admiral, though, based on your looks, time has not acted the same on you. He sighed, collecting his thoughts. Is this truly where I meet my end? Unfortunately it is, I replied, preparing to take him with us. Hold this. I handed him the recovery rope. You lived a long time, Nick stated. Drevin was about to reply when the elevator cart suddenly lurched and began picking up speed. We just passed a section of bad magnets. This cart is basically doomed now. This is how I die, I suppose, Drevin said. And this, I gave the rope 2 sharp tugs, is how you cheat death. The rope suddenly went taut, and we were yanked through an invisible hole. While the Ninth Doctor had disappeared, off to go on his last journey, there were plenty of TTO senior staff and members to warmly receive and quickly indoctrinate Drevin's Skyfall Arrow into our organization. 2:46 p.m. Mabel's time, Friday, April 16th. Year 947, Mabel's Cafe. The following day I was hanging out in Mabel's arcade, trying my hand in a Halo 4 tournament that some of the other TTO operatives had cooked up, when the ghostly form of Mabel's hologram tapped me on the shoulder. We have a match for Jacob Wretch in an obituary from 2399. He was 81. I jumped up and was about to make a break for the door when I realized that I was still holding my controller. I walked up to Nick, the controller outstretched, and placed it in his hands. Nick, I told him, aim for the head. And then I took off. What did he die of? I asked aloud, knowing Mabel could hear me. Lung cancer, came her omnipotent-sounding reply. Dying from cancer in the 24th century doesn't just happen. What were the complications? According to the medical records, it appeared and filled his lungs within 2 weeks. He was suffocated by the tumors before they were able to create replacement organs. Okay, so that's the first step. Have the medbay synthesize new organs for Jacob. We do not have proper medical records. No DNA found for Jacob Wretch. Okay, then we need that. We'll get it from him. I thought for a moment. Preferably when he's alive. I stepped into an elevator. I need dates, specific dates, I called as I walked out into the control room. A few console operatives at their stations around the room began helping Mabel sift through archives and records. It was easier than it could have been. We had a relatively specific date and a correct name. Mabel always goes ballistic when the name of a person in fiction doesn't match their actual counterpart. I've got something, someone called moments later. Head on through. The VTP shifted into a scene of Jacob coughing, sitting on a bedside. I didn't know where he was, and I didn't particularly care, but I tied myself up to the recovery rope and prepared to jump through after him. I lingered for just a moment, however, to make sure someone else first called, "Timeline check is sound, pull out is a go," and then I dove in. Compared to the last time I had seen him, he was a helpless mess. Jacob Wretch, an ancient, weathered human being, looked up from his bedside and wheezed my name before descending into a fit of coughing. If my information was correct, he had only a few minutes before he would pass out, and later would suffocate while unconscious. What an unfortunate way to go. He tried to take a step towards me and collapsed under the floor. I grabbed his hand and began to pull him towards the portal. When I finally yanked him through, he was unresponsive. Thankfully, someone had already sounded the alarm. A team of medics arrived on scene in seconds and carted him off to the medbay, on a stretcher. I untied the recovery rope and let the spring-loaded spool pull it back, and wind it up. "Good, quick extraction, drop it in the logs." "On it," someone replied. As I turned to vacate the room and keep track of Jacob, I received yet another tap on the shoulder. "We have a match for Gregory Thelms, an Irish Mafia record book." "I would not have expected someone like him to be in any sort of mafia," I said, remembering his friendly and openly helpful demeanor. I spun another 180 degrees and returned to the recovery rope, picking it up. He was not part of the mafia. He was the hit. That phrase resonated in my head for a moment, and I stood there, dumbstruck. Dropping the rope, I sighed, "Prep a recovery team. We're going in hot." The VTP stayed on a freeze frame while a special recovery team was assembled. These weren't high-profile people, but they were well-trained, versed in stealth operations, and while I wasn't one of them, I was with them. I donned black clothes, checked my holster, and marched out of the locker room with the armed recovery team. "You're clear to head on through," was the call as we walked purposefully towards the VTP. "All right, guys," I said. "Let's go." I took a breath and stepped through the portal. The bullets were flying when I came out of the other side. 10:42 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Wednesday, November 19th, 23:57, Chicago. Note that should be Central Standard Time. I rolled behind a crate as the rest of the team tumbled through the invisible opening. I moved again, as that crate was torn apart by gunfire from the hit squad. We were in what appeared to be a warehouse, with storage containers of all kinds creating makeshift walls. It was late at night, and the hanging lamps didn't provide much light. Gregory was nowhere to be seen. The 4 special ops men that were hunched behind a pile of all sorts of wooden and metal boxes, across the corridor from me. The hitmen hadn't seen them yet, so I motioned for them to move around to the right and flank them. As they moved out and turned the corner, one of the lead hitmen walked right by where I was sitting, calling Gregory's name. He didn't see me. I quietly raised my DE.P Shocker directed energy pistol, set it to stun, and fired. A jet of blue electricity jumped from the tip of my gun and leapt into his body. He convulsed and fell onto the concrete floor. One down. God knows how many to go. However, my display was more than enough to attract the attention of at least one of the other hitmen, who I could hear thumping down the corridor towards me. I turned and ran, diving behind another wall of boxes. Knowing that he must have heard my movements, I silently turned another corner, stupidly paying more attention to the possibility of him being behind me than to what I was walking into. I looked back to check where I was going and found myself face to face with another of the Mafia men. I fully expected him to have a shoot first, ask questions later mentality, but he paused for a moment, just to stammer, perhaps wondering why a kid dressed in black, certainly not their target, was hiding out in this warehouse. That moment was all I needed, and I raised my weapon and shot him in the chest. Mouth agape, he keeled over, face first. Fearing more footsteps behind me, I spun to see a third enemy round the corner. This time, the electricity went straight into his knee. He yelled. If they didn't know where I was already, they did now. Shouts of, "I see him, and let's get him!" echoed in the cavernous roof, and the only thing that ran through my mind was, how many of these guys are there? That's when I realized they weren't talking about me. 2 men and a woman streamed past my position towards the back of the warehouse. I leaned into the corridor, aimed, and almost fired, when someone said, "Gotcha." I looked up and realized at once that I had been duped. That was only a distraction. I counted 8 Mafia operatives standing on the crate around me, all aiming rifles somewhere on me. One jokester had a laser sight on my crotch. "Drop your weapon." I complied. The prototype pistol clattered on the floor. I raised my hands, but was fully prepared to go into my shoulder holster for my H-Class 6.2A magnetic accelerator pistol. "You mind telling us what you're doing in here?" I opened my mouth to answer when they started dropping. Zet Nicotel and Wraith stunner fire appeared from all sides. In their moment of panic, I snatched my weapon off of the floor and sprinted out of their encirclement towards the rear of the building. The ones who I aimed at were not merely a distraction. Of the 3 who passed me, 1 was a woman. There was no woman in the complement of hitmen that surrounded me. Then I heard gunshots. Not Zat or stunner shots, actual gunshots. I burst through the back door and onto the quay behind the building. The cold November air hit me like a slap in the face, but I brushed it off and kept going. The 3 I had seen had just shot out a lock, and were now proceeding through a door, following Gregory down into Chicago's freight tunnels. I continued to run after them and turned the corner into the doorway as one of them reached to shut it. We locked eyes for a short moment and I shot him in the chest. Without time to react, the man in front of him was stunned and on the ground before he could turn to face me. But as he collapsed, I spotted the woman aiming a pistol over his falling shoulder. I tried to duck out of the doorway, but I had already taken a step down the stairwell. In my panic, I tripped and landed on my back. My gun flew from my hands and skipped along the concrete quay. The woman towered over me, pistol aimed at my forehead. Then from down at the bottom of the stairs, a familiar Irish voice piped up. "Ellis? Sis, don't shoot him, please." "Shut up," she shot back fiercely. There was venom in her voice. "You put a stain on this family name. You don't deserve to govern me actions." I stared at her blankly for a moment, all fear gone. Even through her fury, I heard the Irish accent. Govern me actions almost had me laughing. It probably would have if she hadn't had a gun pointed at my face. And was then I realized why there were so many people to take down one man. It was personal. "I'm gonna end your friend, and then I'm gonna end you," she spat. "Ready, little man?" She cocked the hammer back. 3, 2... "Don't!" Gregory cried. 1! His sister spun around and fired. Gregory screamed and crumpled onto the ground. She turned back and squeezed the trigger again. A Wraith Stunner blast screamed over my head and pounded into her chest. I grabbed her by the arm so she wouldn't tumble down the stairs, catching her falling gun with my other hand. After setting her down lightly, I sprinted down the stairs towards Gregory's apparently lifeless body. When I got there, I noticed a string poking from the wall. With no time to waste, I strung it through the recovery loop on my waist and passed it to the 4 operatives that followed me down the stairs. After grabbing Gregory by the arm, I gave the rope 2 tugs, and we were dragged back through the VTP. A medical team was waiting. 6:16 p.m. Mabel's time, Friday, April 16th, year 947. Mabel's Cafe. Thankfully, a medical team was not needed. He was breathing heavily, shocked and panicked from his near-death experience, but not dead. The bullet had missed his head by inches. "What the hell happened to you, man?" I asked. He stared blankly at me and then began to settle down. Okay, he chanted, taking deep breaths. "There was a hit called on me." "That much we know. Can you tell us why?" "Right, well, when that frigate finally docked with us, you know, the one that shot at you, they came on board and saw the stasis pods were gone." "Obviously." "But we hadn't had time to fake the records, saying we jettisoned them, and they accused us of selling them to the insurrectionists. It was crazy, really, I know, and Jacob tried to save us, but when we went in front of that board of admirals, he had to make some compromises. He was forced into retirement, sort of. Drevin, at least, was put back, thanks to Jacob's sacrifice, and I was, released. But even though the UNSC had dismissed it, I was still haunted by that rumor. My family believed that I had sold those stasis chambers to the insurrectionists. Well, they didn't have all the information, but they still thought I had done something to the enemy for my own benefit. Then they called the hit on me. They said I was always the bad egg of the family, that I didn't belong." Gregory began to break down into tears. I put my hand on his shoulder in a comforting gesture, saying, "You know what? That's fine. You belong here. You're part of my family now." "Really?" His face brightened. "Absolutely. Welcome to the TTO, and welcome to the crew of the timeship Devereaux." In the end, flash clones were used to replace the people we took. You may remember this if you read the Halo novels. It was the same way with John and his compatriots. They used flash clones to replace them, although these were already dead. Gregory was found in the freight tunnels, supposedly shot by his own sister. Scary enough. Jacob was found in his cabin, suffocated by tumors. And Dreven's body was never found, buried in a heap of rubble at the bottom of the orbital elevators. His designs, however, lived on. And because of the work he ended up doing, oddly enough, he became some kind of legend. I'm not entirely sure of all the facts, but there are notes of a man named Skyfall helping in the Human Covenant War, helping in the Human Klingon War, the Human Romulan War. If you look deep enough, you can find it. It's sort of like the Doctor. He became the stuff of myth and legend because of what he started to do. And it was a good kind of wake he left. The Doctor, you always hear he left death and destruction in his wake. That's because he always came at death and destruction and created an end from it. Dreven did the same with words. He created ends with words. It was fantastic to watch him. The actual people did continue to prosper, as I just mentioned, but Gregory Thelms joined me for many years on Devereaux. After that, he found his calling teaching history and working as an archaeologist. He went on to find a third variable time portal in the rubble of the Asgard homeworld. There are still 2 more to be found. We've yet to understand precisely where they are. Dreven Arrow was de-aged and trained under Ambassador Spock for 3 months before going off on his own. He later negotiated a treaty between the different sects of the dissolved Covenant, adding them to the Federation. This was long, long after the Human Covenant War. Jacob Wretch was de-aged, cleaned of cancer, and went on to be a medical technician aboard the Daedalus. Later, he underwent an experimental procedure to cure his colorblindness. It was successful, and he trained to become an F-302 pilot. And that's the end of the men who bargained for the universe, yet they do not end. They've lived on. Those of you that think you can make a difference in the universe, and those of you that can't know that you can, keep staring out at the stars. Maybe we'll come for you someday.